Richard Branson built a $5 billion empire. He can barely read a spreadsheet. Steven Spielberg dropped out of school 3 times. His dyslexia was so bad his teachers thought he was lazy. Albert Einstein couldn't read until he was 9. His teachers called him mentally slow. These aren't rags to riches stories. These are people who got handed the worst possible brain for a classroom and accidentally built the best possible brain for the real world. Why? Because when your brain refuses to process information the normal way, you are forced to find a better way. And the better way they found? It destroys the method schools spent 100 years teaching you. I reverse engineered it. I went through the neuroscience, the cognitive studies, the interviews. It comes down to 4 unfair advantages. By the end of this video, you will never approach a hard problem the same way again. Most people read a sentence and think they understood it. They didn't. They recognized it. Big difference. Your brain sees the words. It matches them to sounds you already know. You feel like you learned something. You learned nothing. This is called passive decoding. It feels like learning. It is actually just pattern matching. You're not thinking. You're just recognizing. Your brain barely breaks a sweat. Cognitive scientists call this fluency illusion. The smoother something feels to read, the less your brain actually processes it. You feel smart. You are getting dumber by the page. Now here's what happens inside a dyslexic brain. The standard decoding pathway doesn't work properly. The brain can't take the easy road. So it builds a detour. It routes the information through the visual cortex, the spatial reasoning centers, the semantic memory networks. It processes the meaning before it processes the words. It builds a 3-dimensional mental model of the concept instead of a flat string of text. This is called compensatory neural recruitment. Yale School of Medicine studied this for over 2 decades. Dr. Sally Shaywitz found that dyslexic brains develop what she called an alternative reading system that, while slower on paper, builds deeper conceptual understanding. Slower to decode, faster to own. The average reader finishes the page and moves on. The dyslexic reader hasn't finished the page, but they have actually understood what the page was about. One of them remembers it next week. Guess which one? Most people think reading fast is the goal. Wrong. Processing deep is the goal. You speed read 3 books a month and remember nothing. That's not reading. That's tourism. You visited the information. You didn't move in. So how do you steal this? You manufacture the translation tax on purpose. You read something once, then close it immediately. No highlighting. No notes yet. Then you describe what you just read out loud. Or in writing, in your own words. Not a summary, a translation. Different words, different structure. Your brain is now forced to process meaning, not just recognize text. It has to rebuild what it just saw from scratch. This is called generative processing. Dr. Mark McDaniel at Washington University proved in 2009 that students who generated their own explanations after reading retained over 3 times more material than students who reread. 3 times. With the same content, the same amount of time, 3 times the retention. The only difference was the translation tax they paid at the end. Stop reading more. Start translating more. Passive recognition is your enemy. Generative processing is your weapon. But here's the problem, though. Most people translate incorrectly. They summarize. Summarizing is still passive. You are just compressing what you already read. Translation means reformatting. Chemistry becomes a story. History becomes a business case. A legal concept becomes a sports analogy. Your brain encodes the concept, not the original language. The dyslexic brain does this automatically because it has no choice. You have to do it deliberately. Make it your habit or stay average. Here's something they don't teach you. Most of human knowledge is not made of facts. It's made of patterns. The people who learn fastest are not the ones who memorize the most facts. They are the ones who see patterns across facts faster than everyone else. Dyslexic people have a documented, neurologically confirmed advantage in this area, and it is almost criminal how little attention it gets. The University of Cambridge ran a study in 2019. Dr. Nicola Brunswick measured pattern recognition speed across two groups, dyslexic adults versus non-dyslexic adults. Same IQ range, same educational background. The dyslexic group identified repeating visual patterns and structural regularities significantly faster. Not slightly faster, significantly. Why? Because they spent their entire lives unable to rely on sequential text processing. Their brains had to find the structure underneath the surface to survive. School forced them to find the skeleton because they couldn't read the skin. Most people look at a complicated topic and see a wall of information. Facts, dates, terms, names. They try to memorize each piece individually. Wrong. That's the amateur move. Experts look at the same wall and ask one question. What is the pattern here? What rule, once understood, explains everything else? Physicists call it a governing equation. Chess players call it positional logic. Surgeons call it illness scripts. They don't memorize symptoms. They recognize illness patterns. One pattern replaces 50 facts. One pattern is infinitely easier to remember and apply than 50 disconnected pieces of data. Here's the tactic. When you encounter any new topic, before you read a single page, ask yourself 3 questions. What does this remind me of? Where have I seen this structure before? What's the underlying rule that would explain most of this? You are forcing pattern extraction before content absorption. Your brain starts organizing incoming information immediately, instead of dumping it into a pile and hoping something sticks. Cal Newport calls this connecting the dots before you fill in the dots. His research on deep work shows that high performers in every field don't just consume information. They actively interrogate it for structural logic. They are building a filing system, not a storage pile. Most people think intelligence is about knowing more. Wrong. Intelligence is about needing to know less because you understand the patterns well enough to derive the rest. Every hour you spend looking for the pattern underneath saves you 10 hours of memorizing surface facts. Start hunting patterns. Stop collecting facts. But here is the problem, though. Patterns alone won't save you if you hit your limit. And you will hit your limit because there's one thing that dyslexic learners do in desperation that turns out to be the most powerful learning tool ever discovered. And schools have been quietly punishing students for doing it for decades. Schools grade on correctness. Get the right answer. Avoid mistakes. Show your work but don't make errors. Idiots. They accidentally engineered out the most powerful learning mechanism your brain has. Productive failure. Educator and cognitive scientist Manu Kapoor at ETH Zurich spent 15 years studying this. His conclusion destroyed conventional education thinking. Students who attempt problems they cannot yet solve, who struggle, fail, flounder, and only then receive instruction, retain and apply knowledge significantly better than students taught the correct method first and then given practice problems. Let that land. Struggling before learning is more effective than learning before struggling. Wrong first, right second. That's the sequence. Dyslexic learners have this forced on them constantly. Every time they encounter a page of text, they struggle. They make wrong connections. They misread, rebuild, try again. Their brains are in constant desirable difficulty. Robert Bjork at UCLA coined that term, desirable difficulty. He proved that making learning harder in specific ways doesn't slow it down. It accelerates long-term retention. The struggle is not the obstacle. The struggle is the mechanism. Hit subscribe before you forget this. We make hard things stick here. Most students read the answer first and then try to understand the problem. Backwards. Completely backwards. What you should do is attack the problem first. With no preparation, no instruction, no safety net. Get it wrong. Get it badly wrong. Write down where you got confused. Write down exactly what broke. Then, and only then, go find the explanation. Your brain has now flagged every gap. The incoming information slots into specific holes. It doesn't float in empty space. It plugs directly into a vacuum your failure created. Here's the implementation. It's called the cold open method. Before you study any new chapter, any new topic, any new concept, close everything and spend 10 minutes attempting to explain it, solve it, or demonstrate it from whatever you already know. You will fail. Good. Your failures are a map. They are showing your brain exactly where to pay attention. When the instruction comes, your brain is not passively absorbing. It's actively correcting. That is the difference between renting information and owning it. Kapoor's research showed one more thing. Students who went through productive failure didn't just remember more. They transferred the knowledge better. They could apply it to new problems they had never seen before. That is the difference between real understanding and exam performance. Real understanding is transferable. Exam performance evaporates the moment the test is over. You already knew this. You've lived it 100 times. The average student avoids struggle. They read examples first. They look up the answer when they get stuck. They remove friction as fast as possible. They are accidentally optimizing for short-term comfort and long-term forgetting. The elite learner creates friction deliberately. They stay stuck on purpose. They force the struggle, and their brain rewards them permanently. But here's the thing, though. Productive failure without a memory system is still a leaking bucket. You can struggle beautifully and still lose everything you gained by next Tuesday. That's where the fourth and final advantage takes over. And this one is the most counterintuitive of all. Dyslexic learners cannot rely on reading something again to remember it. Rereading is the average person's entire memory strategy, and it is worthless. Dr. Henry Roediger at Washington University was blunt about this. Rereading gives a massive illusion of knowing, while adding very little actual retention. Dyslexic learners found out early that rereading doesn't work for them, so they built a completely different system. And it happens to be the system that neuroscience has since confirmed is dramatically superior. They anchor information. They attach new knowledge to existing, emotionally and spatially vivid mental structures. They create stories. They draw pictures. They build narratives. They use what memory researchers call elaborative encoding. The more connections a piece of information has to things you already know, the more retrieval paths your brain has to find it. One isolated fact has one path. That path collapses easily. One fact embedded in a story, attached to a visual, connected to an emotion, linked to an existing concept, has 20 paths. One of those paths will always work. Eleanor Maguire at University College London studied memory champions, people who could memorize hundreds of random numbers or entire decks of cards in minutes. Brain scans showed they were not using any unusual memory capacity. They were using spatial navigation circuits, the same circuits your brain uses to remember how to walk around your own house. They were transforming abstract information into vivid, spatial, narrative journeys. The memory palace technique. This is not a trick for memory competitions. This is how your brain actually wants to store things. School replaced it with memorize this list. Decontextualized, disconnected, naked facts hanging in mental void. Your brain hates that. Your brain rejects it by design. Here's what you're going to do. Pick a route you know perfectly. Your house, your commute, a walk you've taken 100 times. You will walk this route mentally and physically. You will place pieces of information at specific locations along the route. Absurd, vivid, emotionally charged images. The more ridiculous, the better. Your brain was not built to remember boring things. It was built to remember threats, novelty, and emotion. Exploit that. Embarrassing images, violent images, hilarious images, wrong images. All of these encode faster and stay longer than clean, polished, professional diagrams. The reason you remember your most embarrassing childhood moment, but can't remember what you studied last Thursday, is not a mystery. It's just neuroscience. Emotion is the highlighter your brain uses. Use it on purpose, and then you review, but not randomly. Not whenever you feel like it. According to the schedule your forgetting curve demands. Hermann Ebbinghaus mapped this in 1885. Your brain forgets in a predictable curve. Steep at first, then flatter. If you review at the exact moment before the memory fades, the retention curve resets to a higher baseline. Each repetition makes the next forgetting period longer. 10 repetitions done at the right intervals can replace 100 repetitions done randomly. This is spaced repetition. Anki implements it digitally. You don't need the software. You need the principle. Review something within 24 hours. Then again, after 3 days. Then after a week. Then after 2 weeks. Each time your brain rebuilds the structure stronger. Each time the anchor holds more weight. Dyslexic learners do this not because they read about spaced repetition research. They do it because they have no choice. If they don't review, it's gone. They never had the illusion that reading it once was enough. That illusion is your biggest enemy. You think you know it because you recognized it when you read it. You don't know it. You'll find out during the test or the meeting or the moment it actually matters. Here's the full system. 1. Pay the translation tax. Close the material and rebuild what you just learned in your own words before moving on. 2. Hunt the pattern first. Ask what the underlying rule is before you try to absorb the details. 3. Cold. Open everything. Attempt problems before receiving instruction. Map your failures. Then learn to fill the gaps. 4. Anchor, not memorize. Build vivid, spatial, emotional memory structures. Review on a schedule that matches your forgetting curve. Richard Branson didn't build Virgin by learning how to read better. He built it by learning how to think differently about everything he couldn't process the standard way. The disability was the training ground. The disadvantage was the system. You have the same brain architecture. You just never had a reason to build the alternative pathways. Until now. But here is the problem. Even if you apply all 4 of these methods today, there is still one flaw that kills most people's progress. And it has nothing to do with how you study. It has everything to do with when you study and what happens to your brain in the hours before you try to learn anything at all. Most people show up to study already cognitively compromised and have no idea. That's why I made this video breaking down the exact neurological window where your brain is primed to absorb information at maximum capacity and how to engineer your entire day around it. It's almost unfair. Watch it next.